Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be going through the next section of this book called On This Day, A History of the World in 366 Days. And since tomorrow is April 1st, we'll be going over the April section. So if you have an April birthday, let me know down in the comments what day your birthday is and what your favorite fact is on that day. We'll be starting off on April 1st. We have in 1999, Nunavut. In the Northwest Territories in northern Canada, a new homeland for an indigenous people called the Inuit was created. In the Inuit language, Nunavut means our land. In 1983, Human Chain Protest. 70,000 women gathered to protest against nuclear weapons being installed. They made a 14-mile human chain stretching from a U.S. Air Force base in the UK to a nuclear weapons factory. In 1973, Project Tiger. With the Royal Bengal tiger, India's national animal, in danger of extinction from hunting and habitat destruction, the Indian government launched Project Tiger. The organization works to safeguard tiger habitats and increase the numbers of these tigers living in the wild. If you can hear my upstairs neighbor, he's been running laps back and forth all day, so I think he's still at it. My apologies if you hear him. Also on this day in 1976, the business partners Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak launched the Apple Computer Company in California. In 2001, the Netherlands became the first country in the world to legalize marriage between two people of the same sex. And 2013, in Saudi Arabia, construction began on the Jeddah Tower, planned to be the world's first 1-kilometer high skyscraper. Born this day in 1776 is Sophie Germain, French scientist. She confounded 18th century expectations of women by making great contributions to mathematics. And in 1940s, Wangari Maathai, Kenyan environmental activist. She was the first African woman to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. On to April 2nd. In 1930, African emperor Haile Selassie became emperor of Ethiopia. A forward-thinking ruler, Selassie created modern Ethiopia, abolishing slavery and setting up the country's first written constitution. 1877, fired. The first human cannonball act was performed by 14-year-old British acrobat Rosa Matilda Richter, known as Zazel, at the Royal Aquarium in London, UK. And 1931, pitching a curveball. One of the first women to play professional baseball, pitcher Jackie Mitchell shocked fans by striking out superstar hitters Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig during a game in Tennessee. Also on this day in 1513, Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon first saw land in what is now Florida. In 1851, Rama IV became the king of Siam, which today is called Thailand. He ruled until 1868. And in 1982, Argentina launched a military operation to capture the British-controlled Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic, triggering the Falklands War. And born this day in 1805, Hans Christian Andersen, Danish author. He is best known for writing The Little Mermaid. His birthday is now celebrated as International Children's Book Day. In 1939, Marvin Gaye, Black American singer and songwriter. The soul and R&B music he produced has influenced many other artists. Next is April 3rd. 1860, the Pony Express. A mail delivery service powered by hardy riders on fast horses began between Missouri and California. Messages could now be sent between the east and west coasts in just 10 days. In 1981, Osborne 1. The first successful handheld computer was introduced at the West Coast Computer Fair in San Francisco, California. It weighed 22.05 pounds, had a 5-inch display screen, a 64K RAM, and a price tag of $1,795. Look at that screen. And 1922, rise to power. Joseph Stalin became Secretary General of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The role gave him power over the party, an important step on his path to taking full control of the Soviet Union. And also on this day, in 1864, the Union Army captured Richmond, Virginia, a stronghold of the Confederate Army during the U.S. Civil War. In 1973, Martin Cooper of Motorola made the first public mobile phone call to Joel Engel, who headed a rival project at AT&T. And in 2009, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was accepted by Australia. And born this day, in 1934, Jane Goodall, British biologist and conservationist. She spent years studying wild chimpanzees at Gombe National Park, Tanzania. 1934, Pamela Allen, New Zealand children's author and illustrator. She has published more than 30 picture books since 1980. Moving on to April 4. In 1975, Microsoft founded. Childhood friends Paul Allen and Bill Gates set up Microsoft, a computer software company at Albuquerque, New Mexico. It eventually became one of the world's biggest technology companies. In 1873, the Kennel Club. Frustrated by the lack of rules for the dog shows, a group of British dog lovers set up the world's first official club to register purebred dogs and record their activities. And in 1932, a lemony cure. U.S. scientist Charles Glenn King identified vitamin C in lemon juice. He proved that this vitamin, found in many fruits and vegetables, could cure scurvy, a fatal disease caused by a lack of vitamin C. Also on this day, in 1949, 12 countries from across North America and Europe formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. This alliance was set up to protect against potential attacks by the Soviet Union. And in 1968, Black American civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And in 2002, peace agreement between the government of Angola and UNITA rebels ended 27 years of civil war in the country. And born this day in 1928, Maya Angelou, Black American writer, poet, and civil rights activist. She rose to fame with I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings in 1970. Next we have April 5th. 1943, Surviving the Sea. Brazilian fishermen rescued Chinese sailor Poon Lim, who had been adrift at sea for 133 days on a wooden raft after his ship sank in the Atlantic Ocean. He had survived on rainwater and fish. That's like one of my biggest fears. 1965, Lava Lamp. An egg timer filled with strange bubbling liquids inspired British accountant Edward Craven Walker to design one of the most eye-catching light fixtures of the 1960s. And 2012, Robotic Arm. U.S. whiz kid Easton LaChapelle took his design for a 3D printed robotic arm to the Colorado State Science Fair. A meeting there with a girl with an $800,000 prosthetic arm made him want to create affordable prosthetic alternatives. The next year, Easton presented his ideas at a science fair at the White House. Also on this day in 1722, Dutch seafarer Jacob Roggeveen became the first European to visit Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, in the Pacific Ocean, and meet its indigenous people. In 1818, Chile won its struggle for independence from Spain at the Battle of Maipú. And 1998, the world's longest suspension bridge, the 6-lane Akashi Kaikyo, opened in Japan. It crosses the Akashi Strait and connects the cities of Kobe and Iwaya. And born this day in 1973, Pharrell Williams, Black American musician and producer. Rising to fame as part of the music group NERD, he has scored major hits such as Get Lucky and Happy. Next is, don't want to skip a few days there. There we go. Next is April 6th, 1896, the Modern Olympics. King George I of Greece and 60,000 spectators welcomed athletes from 13 countries as they prepared to compete in the first modern Olympics in Athens, 1,500 years after the Olympic Games were banned by Roman Emperor Theodosius I. In 1974, winner takes it all. Swedish pop group ABBA won the Eurovision Song Contest with their catchy song Waterloo, catapulting them to global stardom. I love ABBA. And in 1772, Axe the Tax. Catherine the Great of Russia abolished a hugely unpopular tax on beards that had been in place for more than 70 years. The day is now celebrated in Russia as Beard Day. Not just how would you tax beards, why would you tax beards? I don't understand. Also on this day in 1909, U.S. explorer Robert Peary claimed to have discovered the North Pole, but decades later an investigation cast doubts on this achievement. In 1917, the U.S. entered World War I, declaring war against Germany after German attacks sank U.S. merchant ships and claimed civilian lives. And 1943, the classic children's tale Le Petit Prince, or The Little Prince, by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, was first published in the U.S. I love this book. Lots of things I love on this day. Born this day in 1483, Raphael, Italian painter and architect. Among his most important masterpieces are the paintings now hanging in the Raphael Rooms, a suite of apartments at the Vatican. Next is April 7th. Let's start here, 1805. Musical masterpiece. German composer Ludwig van Beethoven's Symphony No. 3 was performed for the public for the first time in Vienna, Austria. Grander and more dramatic than other symphonies of the time, it marked the beginning of the Romantic era in music. 1795, measuring in metric. France became the first country to officially adopt the metric system, which defined units of length, mass, and volume based on the dimensions of Earth. And 1913, keeping food cool. After making some improvements to the industrial refrigerator, U.S. inventor Fred W. Wolf filed a patent for his new design. He manufactured a simple, inexpensive fridge that could be plugged into the household electric supply. Also on this day, in 1827, a year after inventing friction matches, British chemist John Walker started selling them in his shop. 1927, U.S. Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover made the first public demonstration of a video phone, using it to call officials of the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, or AT&T, the creators of the device. And 1987, the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. opened to the public, displaying its vast collection of artworks by women. And born this day in 1954, Jackie Chan, Hong Kong-born Chinese movie star. He is best known for mixing dangerous acrobatic stunts with comedy. He popularized Kung Fu in Hollywood and has starred in many movies. Next, we're moving on to April 8th. 1271, the Fallen Fortress. Considered impossible to capture, the Crac des Chevaliers fortress in Syria, built by European crusaders, was seized by Sultan Baybars, an important Islamic ruler. 1942, Unlikely Soldier. A group of Polish soldiers adopted a brown bear cub in Iran and gave him the rank of private. The bear became the most famous member of their regiment and was later promoted to corporal. And 2008, Turbine Towers. The 3 power-generating wind turbines between the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Bahrain were turned on together for the first time. No other skyscrapers had been designed with built-in wind turbines before. Or since, I think. Also on this day, 1904, after nearly 1,000 years of recurring conflict, Britain and France signed the Entente Cordiale, finally making peace. 1974, Black American baseball star Hank Aaron hit his 715th home run to beat Babe Ruth's record in front of more than 53,000 spectators. In 1983, live on television, U.S. magician David Copperfield seemingly made the Statue of Liberty vanish for a few moments, shocking viewers with his astonishing trick. And born this day, in 1941, Vivienne Westwood, self-taught British fashion designer. She became an icon of British fashion with her bold designs. Next is April 9th. In 1865, the Civil War ends. General Robert E. Lee of the Confederate Army surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant of the U.S. Army at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, effectively ending the U.S. Civil War. The two sides had been fighting over the issue of slavery for 4 years. In 1860, oldest voice recording. French inventor Edouard Léon Scott Martinville recorded himself singing a French folk song on his phonautograph. Unheard for almost 150 years, his recording was brought to life by Motion Audio Technology in 2008. And way back in 1288, the Battle of Bac Dang. In a decisive naval battle, Vietnamese forces commanded by Truong Hung Dao trapped and defeated Mongol invaders from China on the Bac Dang River. After fierce fighting, they seized 400 enemy warships and captured the Mongol general Omar Khan. Also on this day, in 1867, the U.S. agreed to purchase Alaska from Russia for about 2 cents per acre. 1939, barred from singing at Washington, D.C.'s biggest concert hall, Black American musician Marian Anderson instead performed an open-air concert for 75,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial. And 1947, an interracial group of Americans took a 2-week ride on a bus through 4 southern states, challenging years of segregation on interstate buses. And born this day in 1822 is Arun of Kungkek, Inuit hunter. He he took up drawing and printmaking when bedridden with tuberculosis and became one of the pioneers of modern Greenlandic art. Next is, here we go, April 10th, 1849, accidental invention. U.S. mechanic Walter Hunt received a patent for his invention, the safety pin. He'd had the idea for the useful item as he was twisting an ordinary piece of wire in his fingers. In 2017, champion for education. At just 19 years old, Pakistani activist Malala Yousafzai became the United Nations' youngest ever messenger of peace. She's recognized internationally for drawing attention to the plight of 130 million girls around the world who do not have access to education. And 1833, first global black star. On his opening night, stage actor Ira Aldridge won over his audience as the first black person to play Shakespeare's Othello at the famous Theatre Royal in London, UK. He went on to tour the world. Also on this day in 1815, Mount Tambora erupted in Indonesia. It was the most powerful eruption in recorded history. At least 10,000 people were killed. In 1998, signed on Good Friday, the Belfast Agreement ended 30 years of violent conflict over how Northern Ireland should be governed. And 2019, the Event Horizon Telescope captured the first ever photograph of a supermassive black hole. And born this day in 1993, Daisy Ridley, British actor. She rose to global fame after playing the lead role of Rey in the Star Wars films. Next is April 11th, 1831, Lewis chess pieces. Found on the Isle of Lewis, Scotland, and dating back to the 12th century, these medieval artifacts were displayed to the public for the first time in Edinburgh, Scotland. The game pieces were carved from walrus tusk and sperm whale tooth. In 1931, impressive skyscraper. In the U.S., the construction of New York City's Empire State Building was finished, following 7 million hours of work carried out by 3,400 workers over just 410 days. It was the world's tallest building until 1972. And 2010, balloon flight. U.S. pilot Jonathan Trapp spent 13 hours, 36 minutes, and 57 seconds flying over North Carolina using a cluster of 57 enormous helium balloons. During the overnight flight, he covered more than 109 miles and reached a peak height of 7,474 feet. Also on this day in 1814, the Treaty of Fontainebleau was signed in France, ending Napoleon Bonaparte's rule as emperor and forcing him to leave the country. And in 1941, French officer Alain Luray became the first soldier to escape from Germany's Colditz Castle, a maximum security prison during World War II. And born this day in 1991 is Thiago Alcantara, Spanish soccer player. He has played for many clubs such as FC Barcelona and also the Spanish national team. Next is April 12th. In 1937, Whittle's jet engine. Overcoming doubts raised by scientists, British engineer Frank Whittle successfully tested his invention, the first jet engine designed to power an aircraft. The government helped finance his work during World War II. 1961, Human in Space. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin spent 108 minutes orbiting Earth in his spacecraft Vostok 1, becoming the first person to travel into space. Gagarin's flight was remotely controlled from Earth by a computer program. And 1861, the Battle of Fort Sumter. The first major battle of the U.S. Civil War took place, following decades of simmering tensions between the northern and southern states. Fort Sumter, controlled by the U.S. Army, was bombarded by Confederate forces. Also on this day, in 1919, architect Walter Gropius founded Bauhaus, an art and design school in Weimar, Germany. It gathered together Europe's most brilliant artists and designers. 1964, Black American civil rights activist Malcolm X gave his ballot or the bullet speech at the King Solomon Baptist Church in Detroit, Michigan. And in 1992, Europe's first Disneyland, originally called Euro Disneyland Park, opened near Paris. And born this day in 1913, Keiko Fukuda, Japanese-American martial artist. She was the highest-ranking female judoka in sports history. In 1925, Evelyn Berizin, U.S. computer designer. She developed one of the earliest computer systems for airline reservations. Next is April 13th. 2019, Stratolaunch. Originally designed as a flying launch pad for rockets, Stratolaunch, the world's largest aircraft by wingspan, flew for the first time over the Mojave Desert in California. The distance between its wingtips is longer than a soccer pitch. Wow. 1953, the name's Bond. British writer Ian Fleming's Casino Royale introduced the fictional British Secret Service agent James Bond. It was the first book in a series of 12 action-packed spy novels that were later turned into blockbuster movies. And in 2017, The Ultimate Challenge. Having already climbed the world's 7 highest mountains and skied to the South Pole, 20-year-old Japanese adventurer Marin Minayama became the youngest person to complete the Explorer's Grand Slam when she reached the North Pole. Also on this day, in 1204, though tasked with recapturing Jerusalem, a Western Christian army instead sacked the Byzantine city of Constantinople and stole its treasures. 1964, Bahamian-American actor Sidney Poitier became the first black person to win the Best Actor Oscar for the film Lilies of the Field. And in 1997, in a major golfing win, U.S. golfer Tiger Woods became the youngest winner of the Masters tournament at the age of 21. Then born this day in 1519, Catherine de' Medici, Italian noblewoman. She married King Henry II of France and had a powerful role in French politics as the mother of 3 future kings. Next is April 14th, 1935, Dust Storm. The day turned dark when an enormous cloud of sand and dust blew into the U.S. drought-stricken southern plains, giving the area its famous name, the Dust Bowl. 1561, Battle in Space. Residents of Nuremberg in modern Germany reported seeing hundreds of unidentified flying objects fighting with each other in the sky at sunrise. It's now thought they saw a sundog, a type of natural phenomenon similar to a rainbow. And in 2010, Cloud Vash. The explosive eruption of a volcano under the Icelandic ice cap of Eyjafjallajökull spewed huge quantities of ash into the atmosphere, causing air traffic chaos across large parts of Europe for a week afterward. Also on this day in 1865, U.S. President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. In 1986, in Gopalganj, Bangladesh, 92 people were killed by the heaviest hailstones on record, with some ice chunks weighing up to 2 pounds. And in 1990, Georgians held the first ever Day of the Georgian Language, celebrating their country's official language. And born this day, an icon. In 1932, Loretta Lynn, U.S. country singer and songwriter. Throughout her 60-year career, she wrote songs that were inspired by her own life experiences. Next is April 15th. In 2019, the Blazing Cathedral. A massive fire, most likely caused by an electrical fault, engulfed this centuries-old Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, France. The fire melted the building's lead roof and toppled its 315-foot-high spire. In 1941, Vought Sikorsky VS-300. Russian-American aircraft designer Igor Sikorsky's helicopter set a record in the U.S. by staying in the air for 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 14.5 seconds. Sikorsky's design became the model for future helicopters. And in 1912, Atlantic tragedy. On its first voyage, the HMS Titanic, the largest and most luxurious steamship of its time, hit an iceberg and sank in the freezing North Atlantic Ocean. More than 1,500 passengers and crew died. Also on this day in 1868, members of the indigenous Maori tribe were elected to New Zealand's parliament for the first time following the Maori Representation Act. In 1945, the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany was liberated by British forces, exposing the horrific extent of Nazi war crimes. And in 1995, U.S. entrepreneur Ray Kroc opened his first McDonald's franchise in Illinois, later turning the fast food company into a global success. And born this day in 1452, Leonardo da Vinci, Italian artist and engineer. He is best known for his painting The Mona Lisa and for designing various flying machines, among many other things. And in 1469, Guru Nanak, religious leader. A Hindu by birth, he traveled widely in search of spiritual truth and founded the Sikh religion. I gotta admit, I'm like hiding my inner fangirl about the Titanic. Kind of upset that they have this on the 15th instead of the 14th, because it did sink at like 2 in the morning on April 15th. But also, like, I don't know. I always associate the Titanic with April 14th, but we're not going to get into that. We're going to move on to April 16th. Starting in 1346, we have Dušan the Mighty. Powerful Serbian king Stefan Dušan crowned himself emperor of Serbia, Greece, and Bulgaria. During his reign, the Serbian Empire expanded to include most of Southeast Europe. In 2020, Birthday Walk. Just before his 100th birthday, former British Army officer Captain Tom Moore walked 100 sponsored laps of his garden, raising more than £30 million to support medical charities during the COVID-19 pandemic. In 1972, Panda Presents. U.S. President Richard Nixon and First Lady Pat Nixon welcomed 2 young giant pandas, Ling Ling and Xing Xing, to the Smithsonian's National Zoo at Washington, D.C. The popular pair had been sent as gifts by Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai. Also on this day, 1746, the French-supported Jacobite army was defeated at the Battle of Culloden, ending their fight to seize the British throne. 1847, in New Zealand, a British officer shot a Maori chief by accident, causing conflict between indigenous Maori and British settlers. In 1853, a 21-gun salute was fired to celebrate India's first passenger train, which traveled from Mumbai, which was called Bombay then, to Thane? Never heard of this place. A distance of 21 miles. And born this day in 1755, Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun, French painter. One of the most successful female artists of her time, she painted portraits of various famous women, including Queen Marie Antoinette. Next is April 17th, 2017, Underwater Wonders. Austrian underwater filmmaker Alexander Benedict filmed vibrant sea creatures living in the sub-zero waters below the ice caps at Tasiilaq, Greenland. He found colorful jellyfish and shrimps that glow in the dark. 1964, must-have motor. Customers rushed to buy the stylish and affordable Ford Mustang when it was unveiled at the World's Fair in New York City. In just one day, almost 220,000 cars were sold in the showrooms across the country. And in 1964, U.S. pilot Geraldine Jerry Mock became the first woman to complete a solo flight around the world. It had taken her 29 days, 11 hours, and 59 minutes to circle the globe. Also on this day, in 1961, Cuban refugees supported by the U.S. began the Bay of Pigs invasion in an unsuccessful attempt to topple the communist government of Fidel Castro in Cuba. 1982, Canada gained full independence from the UK when British monarch Queen Elizabeth II signed Canada's new constitution into law. And in 2014, Aleksander Doba, a 67-year-old Polish kayaker, became the first person to paddle a canoe across the Atlantic Ocean from Europe to North America. He made the journey from Portugal to Florida in 196 days. Wow. And born this day, 1974, Victoria Beckham, British style icon. She rose to international fame as a member of the Spice Girls, the best-selling 1990s pop group, before starting her own fashion label. Next is April 18th. In 2019, ancient carnivore. An ancient mammal species bigger than a polar bear was identified. The 22 million-year-old bones of Simbakubwa kutokafrika had lain forgotten in a drawer at Nairobi National Museum, Kenya, for nearly 40 years. Wow. In 1938, here comes Superman. Comic book legend Superman appeared for the first time in Action Comics #1. Created by U.S. writer and artist duo Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, Superman was the first comic book hero to have superpowers. And 1506, St. Peter's Basilica. In Rome, Italy, Pope Julius II laid the foundation stone of the new St. Peter's Basilica. The enormous stone church was designed by architect Donato Bramante, whose work was continued after his death by other artists, including Michelangelo and Raphael. It took 150 years to build. It's a really poorly constructed sentence because it looks like he was killed by the other artists, including Michelangelo and Raphael, but I know what they're trying to say. Also on this day in 1775, U.S. patriot Paul Revere rode through the night to alert the colonial militia about an impending attack by British troops. In 1906, A 7.9 magnitude earthquake struck San Francisco, California, destroying much of the city and killing more than 3,000 people. And in 2018, cinemas reopened in Saudi Arabia after a 35-year ban. Marvel's Black Panther was the first movie to be screened. That's a good one. And I don't like Marvel movies, but that's a good movie. Born this day in 1813, James McCune Smith, Black American physician. Born into slavery, he became the first Black person in the U.S. to earn a medical degree. Next, we have April 19th, 1971, the first space home. The first ever space station, Salyut 1, was launched into Earth's orbit as part of the Soviet Union space program. It stayed in space for 175 days and circled Earth nearly 3,000 times. 1775, American Revolution. The first battles of the American Revolution between Britain and its colonies took place at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. And in 1968, snowmobile trek. After journeying for 42 days on snowmobiles, U.S. explorer Ralph Plysted and his teammates Walter Pedersen, Gerald Pitzel, and Jean-Luc Bombardier became the first people to reach the North Pole by traveling over the surface of the Arctic ice. Also on this day, in 1987, the U.S.'s favorite cartoon family, The Simpsons, first appeared in a series of short episodes on The Tracey Ullman Show. Also in 1987, the UK's first medical unit for HIV and AIDS patients was opened by Diana, Princess of Wales, in London, UK. And in 2018, Swaziland's King Mswati III changed the country's name to Eswatini to celebrate 50 years of independence from British rule. And apparently because the king thought it sounded too much like Switzerland. Born this day, 1946, Duygu Asena, Turkish journalist and civil rights champion. She campaigned for equality and wrote about injustices toward women. Next is April 20th. Let's start here in 2008. Triumph in Japan. Claiming victory at Indy Japan 300, U.S. racing driver Danica Patrick became the first woman to win an IndyCar Series race. She took the lead from the top contenders in the final few laps of the 200-lap race. If it's 200 laps, why is it the Indy Japan 300? I don't know. Someone tell me. 1961, human rockets. In a pioneering 13-second flight, U.S. engineer Harold Graham became the first person to be lifted off the ground by a jet propulsion device without being tethered. He rose 4 feet into the air. And in 2010, disaster at sea. An explosion on Deepwater Horizon, an oil drilling rig off the coast of Louisiana, caused an enormous fire and the death of 11 workers. 2 days later, the rig sank, causing the world's worst ever oil spill, which devastated many marine wildlife species. Also on this day, in 1611, English playwright William Shakespeare's tragedy Macbeth was performed for the first time at the Globe Theatre in London, England. That's a good one. In 1862, French chemist Louis Pasteur and biologist Claude Bernard first tested their new methods for preserving liquids, such as milk. And born this day, 1964, is Andy Serkis, British film and voice actor, director, and motion capture artist. He's famous for portraying Gollum in The Lord of the Rings. Love those movies too. Next is April 21st, 1934, a monster mystery. A photograph was published appearing to show a monster swimming in the waters of Loch Ness, Scotland, It was later revealed to be a hoax. In 2015, high-speed train. The Central Japan Railway Company's experimental LO Series maglev train reached a top speed of 375 miles per hour during a test run in Yamanashi, Japan. And in 1526, Mughal victory. The founder of the Mughal Empire, Babur, defeated the larger army of Ibrahim Lodi, the Sultan of Delhi, at the First Battle of Panipat in what is now northern India. Babur's victory marked the start of Mughal rule in the Indian subcontinent. Also on this day, in 753 BCE, I think that's the oldest date yet in this month, legend has it that the city of Rome was founded on this day by twin brothers Remus and Romulus on the banks of the Tiber River. In 1782, in present-day Thailand, Siamese King Rama I established his kingdom's capital, which became known as Bangkok. And in 1966, the last Ethiopian emperor, Haile Selassie I, visited Jamaica. His visit is celebrated as the annual Rastafari holiday, Grounation Day. Grounation Day? Grounation Day, I'm not sure. Jamaican slang is really interesting. Born this day in 1816 is Charlotte Bronte, British author and poet. Her novels, such as Jane Eyre, a really good one, are considered classics of English literature. It's a weird story, but great writing. 1926, Elizabeth II, Queen of the United Kingdom and 15 Commonwealth countries. She was the longest reigning living monarch. I guess she still is, right? Even though she's passed on, she's still the longest reigning living monarch. Full stop, period, out of anywhere. Let's move on to April 22nd, 1823, shoes on wheels. An early idea for inline roller skates was patented by Robert John Tyers, a British fruit seller. Each skate was formed by a single row of 5 wheels attached to a wooden sole and brake. In 1970, the first Earth Day. U.S. politician Gaylord Nelson organized the first Earth Day, a yearly event to raise awareness about the planet's environmental problems. Millions of Americans took part in protests and workshops. And in 1915, gas attack. In a surprise attack, the German army released 150 tons of poisonous chlorine gas on the battlefield at Ypres, Belgium, killing 1,100 Allied soldiers and injuring 7,000. It was the first time that a large-scale chemical attack had been carried out in war. Also on this day in 1500, Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral became the first European to arrive in South America, claiming the land that is now present-day Brazil for Portugal. In 1993, the China National Space Administration, the National Space Agency of the People's Republic of China, was founded. And in 2016, the Paris Climate Agreement was signed by 195 countries in New York City. And born this day in 1989 is Aron Gunnarsson, Icelandic soccer player. He's played more than 90 international matches and captained Iceland in the UEFA Euro 2016. Next is April 23rd. I see one of my favorite people ever on this page. 2016 chart topper. Music sensation Beyoncé became the first ever artist to top the US Billboard 200 album chart with their first 6 albums, when her 6th studio album, Lemonade, went straight to number 1 on the US chart. I love Lemonade. I think my favorite album, it's the one with Irreplaceable on it. What's that one called?
Deja Vu on it. Anyway, if you know Beyonce, you know the album I'm talking about. That's a great album. It's not 4, is it? It's not. Is it 4? I think that's a 4. Anyway, I love Beyonce. In 1867, early animation. One of the first moving picture machines, the Zoetrope, was patented by U.S. inventor William E. Lincoln. Viewers could make the animation spring to life by rotating the cylinder, which had images drawn on the inside surface, and looking through its viewing slits. In 1616, great playwright. Notable English playwright William Shakespeare died on this day. During his lifetime, he wrote 39 plays and more than 154 sonnets, which is a type of love poem. Also on this day in 1920, led by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the Grand National Assembly of Turkey rejected the rule of Sultan Mehmet VI, bringing an end to the 600-year-old Ottoman Empire. In 2019, the government of Malawi and the World Health Organization launched the first malaria vaccine. And in 2020, a 40-million-year-old fossil of a frog was found on Seymour Island, Antarctica, suggesting that amphibians may have lived on the icy continent in the past. And born this day in 1933 is Annie Easley, Black American computer programmer. Employed by NASA, she developed software for the powerful Centaur rocket. Next is April 24th. In 1888, it's a Kodak moment. U.S. inventor George Eastman started the Eastman Kodak Company, which mass-produced portable box cameras that could be used easily by anyone. In 1918, tank combat. 3 German A-7V tanks faced off against 3 British Mark IV tanks at the Battle of Villers-Bretonneux in France during World War I. It was the first time in military history that tanks had fought against each other. And in 2018, streaming music. For the first time in music history, the money made from listeners paying to stream music on services such as Spotify and Apple Music was greater than that from the sales of music CDs. Also on this day, in 1184 BCE, we have a new record for the oldest date this month. The legendary Trojan War ended on this day with the fall of the city of Troy to the Greeks, according to ancient histories. In 1990, Gruniard Island, Scotland, was declared safe after being out of bounds for 48 years. The uninhabited island had been a testing site for biological weapons during World War II. And in 2020, in Egypt, archaeologists announced they had discovered the 3,500-year-old mummy of an unknown teenage girl. And born this day, another amazing icon of American pop music in 1982, Kelly Clarkson, U.S. singer. She won a record deal on the first season of the TV series American Idol and went on to have several hit singles and albums. Next is April 25th. In 1719, Robinson Crusoe. British writer Daniel Defoe's novel about a sailor shipwrecked on an island for 28 years was published in London, UK. The story has since been translated into more than 100 languages. In 1960, Operation Sandblast. The nuclear-powered submarine USS Triton finished circumnavigating or traveling around the globe underwater. It had traveled 36,000 nautical miles in 85 days. And in 1915, the Gallipoli campaign. Armed troops began an attack on Turkey after it sided with Germany during World War I. The 8-month campaign failed and hundreds of thousands were killed or wounded. The campaign is remembered in Australia and New Zealand each year on Anzac Day. Also on this day in 1792, French highwayman Nicolas Jacques Peltier became the first person to be executed for his crimes by guillotine. In 1944, the Sikorsky YR-4B became the first helicopter to be used in combat when it was brought in to rescue 4 U.S. and British soldiers in Burma, which is now Myanmar, during World War II. We just learned about the first Sikorsky, didn't we? That's interesting. And in 1946, Nazi occupation and Benito Mussolini's dictatorship ended in Italy. Italians now celebrate this date yearly as Liberation Day. And born this day in 1917 is Ella Fitzgerald, Black American jazz singer. Known as the Queen of Jazz, she became famous for her vocal range. During her 60-year career, she won 14 Grammys and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She has the range. Next is April 26th. In 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. During an accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power station in Ukraine, large amounts of radioactive material were spewed out into the atmosphere. The material spread and exposed millions of people to harmful nuclear radiation. In 1994, democracy at last. After years of being governed by a regime that denied black citizens even basic rights, South Africans of all races voted for a new government. Nelson Mandela was elected the first black president. Also on this day, in 1803, more than 3,000 meteors rained down on the city of L'Aigle in France, finally convincing scientists that meteors came from space. Where else would they have come from? I don't know. In 1989, one of the deadliest tornadoes in history struck the Manikganj district of Bangladesh, killing around 1,300 people and injuring 1,200. Lots of weather disasters in Bangladesh this month. Probably a dangerous time to be outside in Bangladesh. And in 2019, the Waorani people of Ecuador won a historic court case against the government to save their land from oil drilling. And born this day in 1888, Anita Loos, U.S. writer. A successful author, she was also the first female script writer in Hollywood. And in 1918, Fanny Blankers-Koen, Dutch athlete. She's Dutch. Blankers-Koen. She won 4 golds at the 1948 Summer Olympics at the age of 30 while pregnant with her 3rd child. And next we have April 27th. Let's start here in 2005 with the Airbus A380. The world's largest passenger plane, the Airbus A380, took to the skies for the first time with a crew of 6. Taking off from Toulouse-Blagnac Airport in France, it flew for 3 hours and 54 minutes before landing. 2011. Tornado tragedy. More than 300 lives were lost when a record-breaking 216 tornadoes hit the U.S. on the same day. Alabama was the worst-hit state with 238 deaths. And 2006, the Freedom Tower. Construction of the Freedom Tower began in New York City. It is the tallest building in the country and shares its name with the North Tower of the original World Trade Center, destroyed by terrorists on 9/11 in 2001. Also on this day, in 1943, 3 years after getting himself arrested to collect inside information on the Auschwitz concentration camp, Polish officer Witold Pilecki finally escaped. In 1956, world heavyweight champion Rocky Marciano retired from boxing, remaining undefeated in his 49 professional matches. And 2018, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean leader Moon Jae-in met in a summit to establish peace between their 2 countries. And born this day in 1927 is Coretta Scott King, Black American civil rights leader. Wife of Martin Luther King Jr., she spent her life promoting his philosophy of nonviolence, social justice, and human rights. Let's see, we've got a couple days left here. Let's see what we've got. Let's see what happens on April 28th. At 224 CE, the Battle of Hormozgan. Sasanian king Ardashir I defeated the Parthian king Artabanus V and set up the Sasanian Empire in ancient Persia. He went on to become one of Persia's greatest rulers, and his empire lasted more than 400 years. In 2001, space tourist. U.S. millionaire Dennis Tito traveled to the International Space Station on board a Russian Soyuz spacecraft. He funded the trip himself at a cost of $20 million, becoming the first space tourist. And in 1947, the Kon-Tiki expedition. Norwegian scientist Tor Heyerdahl and his crew of 5 set sail from Peru for Polynesia on the Kon-Tiki, a raft made of locally available balsa wood. They wanted to prove that ancient South Americans could have traveled the 4,300 miles to the Polynesian islands. Also on this day in 1869, Chinese and Irish workers set a record by laying more than 10 miles of the Pacific Railroad in the U.S. in one day. 1952, the U.S. occupation of Japan after World War II ended when the San Francisco Peace Treaty came into effect. And 2019, on reaching the bottom of the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean, in a submersible, U.S. diver Victor Vescovo found plastic waste. Can you believe it? Oh, that's terrible. And born this day in 1974, Penelope Cruz, Spanish actor. She became an international star after her leading roles in many Spanish-language films. Next is April 29th. Start here, 1944, Most Wanted. Nancy Wake, one of Britain's leading special agents in World War II, parachuted into France. There she assembled a resistance group to attack German forces. She eventually reached the top of the Nazis' most wanted list. In 1489, the Maid of Orleans. During the 100 Years' War between France and England, 17-year-old Joan of Arc led the French army to free the city of Orleans, which had been besieged by the English. She became a legendary figure and was made a patron saint of France in 1920. 2 iconic women, right? Also on this day, in 1770, explorer James Cook and his crew landed at Botany Bay in Australia, beginning British interest in colonizing the continent. In 1961, the World Wildlife Fund was set up to raise money to protect animals and habitats that are threatened by humans. And in 2011, millions of TV viewers, including me, watched as Prince William, Duke of Cambridge, married Catherine Middleton in a lavish ceremony at London's Westminster Abbey. It started at like 3 in the morning my time, but by golly, I watched it. And lastly is April 30th, because there's 30 days in September, April, June, and November. 2005, the Tower of Buns. Revived after a 26-year pause, the Bun Festival was hosted on Chung Chau Island in Hong Kong. People raced up tall towers covered with buns, which they collected for good fortune. That's a fun festival. 1789, Founding Father. George Washington took his oath as the first president of the newly formed United States of America. During the American Revolution, he had led the 13 colonies to independence from British rule. And in 1993, the World Wide Web. British scientist Tim Berners-Lee made the software for his invention, the World Wide Web, free for public use. Anyone could now use it to share information between computer systems on the internet. Absolutely world-changing decision there, right? Can you imagine? Anyway, I can't imagine, but also on this day in 1006, astronomers around the world watched as the night sky was lit up by the brightest supernova or exploding star in recorded history. In 1888, in the deadliest hailstorm on record, it was not in Bangladesh, hailstones as large as goose eggs killed 246 people in Moradabad, India. Same subcontinent, I suppose. In 2013, Queen Beatrix gave up her throne for her son Willem-Alexander, who became King of the Netherlands. And born this day, 1985, is Gal Gadot Farsano, Israeli actor. She rose to fame playing the superhero Wonder Woman in a series of Hollywood films based on the DC Comics character. And that's going to be it for tonight. We'll continue the book next month to find out what happens in May. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. I hope my upstairs neighbor wasn't too loud in some parts. It's whatever. And I hope that you have a very good